Chapter 1. Grandolin L'Fyltar, Foreign Minister, Zindahli Empire. Planet, Zindahli Prime. Distance, 37,543 light-years from the Sol system.
Zot, Zot, Zot! Foreign Minister Grandolin of the Crystalline Zindahli Empire repeatedly yelled. It was an obscenity of extreme frustration, anger, and disbelief of her language. In an exasperated fury, her upper arms were raised toward the ceiling, fingers spread out wide, while her lower arms hung by her side with clenched fists. Her 4 fingers gripped so tightly she thought she might splinter. They took a human, hostage! She yelled at the ceiling, then slowly lowered her upper arms in resignation. The polished selenite walls of the embassy's inner chamber hummed and breathed in sympathetic resonance with her voice. It was a unique aspect of Zindahli crystalline architecture. Buildings did not merely house their inhabitants, they connected with them empathetically. Over time, the crystal architecture melded with its owner, and this room had melded with Grandolin. That alone would not have been a problem. The problem was that the walls did more than breathe with her. They reflected her emotional state, and now glowed the same deep red that she did, the color of Zindahli rage. Years ago, when she was first given her office, she had loved that feature. The way her satisfaction would shimmer through the corridors in a cool blue after a treaty signing, or the warm, welcoming green when a foreign dignitary visited. Now, the walls threw her red anger back at her from every angle, so that she stood at the center of her own fury. It made everything worse. Her aide, Visk, stood with his 4 slender arms folded close to his body, the universal Zindahli posture of guarded composure. He had served Grandolin for 7 years, and he had never once heard her use that word or seen her glow in fury. Not when the Kryzak delegation had insulted the emperor's lineage. Not when the Vilteri trade collapse had vaporized a quarter of her sector's economy in a single week. Not even when her own daughter had announced she was leaving the diplomatic corps to become a poet. But now, Zot, 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 in deep red. Minister, Visk tried, we should perhaps... Do you know what humans do, Visk? Grandolin turned to him, cutting him off. The red glowed through her outer crystalline facets and bled through her white imperial robes. It was, she thought, unbecoming of her. She took a deep breath, her crystalline structure expanding with the inhalation. I'm the foreign minister to the emperor, she told herself. Her whole life she was trained to keep her face still and her walls still with it, and she needed to do that now more than ever. She had not meant to go red. It just happened. The moment she read the memo, she had lost control of her color. It had only happened once before, and the thought of it brought on a tinge of pain. 10 years ago, when her partner passed away, she had turned gray and did not think that she could ever turn back. He was her one and only resonant partner. A perfect frequency match, a rare phenomenon among the Zindahli, where 2 frequencies harmonize into a near-perfect, undeniable union. So rare that Grandolin did not know anyone in her immediate circle who had known any harmonic partner. When his frequency faded, she had felt it in every facet of her body, a void so complete that she had developed fractures in both upper forearms and her torso. The doctor had told her she was fortunate. Some harmonic partners did not fracture. They shattered. The beauty of a harmonic relationship was profound, a mental clarity, an emotional balance, and a depth of love that few other species would ever experience. But the loss sometimes could be greater. There was no medical intervention, no therapy, no science that could protect you from it. Some never integrated back into society. Some lost limbs beyond any hope of repair. And the mental anguish, the doctor had said, would never fully leave you. I'm sorry for your loss. She had heard those words countless times, from family, from friends, from off-world dignitaries, and strangers whose faces she did not recognize. People who had known him, or those she had met only once. It was a universal phrase spoken by nearly every sentient species across the galaxy, translated nearly identically across each language. For the Zindahli, it was more than custom. The words, when spoken, carried a deep empathetic resonance. It was felt as much as heard. For Grandolin, the words had become hollow, meaningless, and empty. She accepted them, thanked the ones who offered them, and moved on. The irony was that loss was never really a loss. In place of what had once been the warm exuberance of his presence, came something cold and haunting, a pain so indescribable it felt like only death could release it. And yet, ironically, it was those exact words that brought her back. Months later, still in mourning, an old friend reached out. They had not seen each other in over a decade. Years ago, they had been close. The kind of close that feels like it will always be there until one day life takes over. Her friend had left to pursue off-world work in xenobiology. They both stayed in contact for a while, and as life became what it was, the messages had simply stopped. It was no one's fault. It was what it was. Now she had returned to Zindahli Prime after more than a decade of being away. Grandolin had not thought of her in years until the message arrived. She did not feel like meeting in a public space, so they met in private at her friend's old loft. When she entered, it looked just as it had over 10 years ago, as though it had not been touched in all that time. Her friend admitted as much with a small, coy smile. She brewed Halay tea. They sat and spoke of the small things in life that required no effort, the kind of conversation that fills a room without asking anything of anyone. Then finally, with some courage, her friend looked at her and said, "I'm sorry for your loss." Something deep within Grandolin snapped. She laughed. She had not meant to. Perhaps it was all the forced composure, the years of it, stretching back to childhood, through her years as Home Minister for foreign delegations, through everything in between. It came out uncontrolled and hysterical, the kind of laughter that frightens the person laughing as much as anyone watching. The words had finally, in their own strange way, sunk in. The laughter turned to tears, then to anger. She had never had the space to mourn in her own way. The expectations that came with her position as a minister and a mother. They had not seen each other in over a decade, had barely communicated in all that time, and yet once they had been close. It was that fine line that allowed Grandolin to break down, to be vulnerable. She had not opened up to anyone, and now she was letting go. Her friend did not react or shift uncomfortably. She simply sat and listened, still and patient, while Grandolin wept, blue dust drifting away from her eyes, apologizing between sobs. "Sorry for your loss," she laughed again, this time through her tears. Her words were not aimed at anyone. "It should be, sorry for your gain. Sorry that you have to carry so much pain, so much agony." She stopped herself. "Ugh, I swear," she sighed, eyes full of tears. "I'm sorry. I know I sound selfish. I know those words are for him. I know his loss was enormous. It was." She paused. "But he's gone, and I'm still here, and have to carry this for our daughter, for myself. I just, Zot! I'm so angry. It is so much pain. How is that a loss? I have lost nothing and gained a whole lot of everything else." Her friend was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke and what she did afterwards, Grandolin wished had come earlier, though perhaps it arrived precisely at the time she needed it. That depth of loss you feel, Gran, is the exact depth of the love you had for each other. It is never going to go away, but it is also who you are going to be now. Grandolin felt only bitterness at the words until her friend reached out with all four hands to take hers. That was when she noticed it, a fracture running from her friend's right lower hand facet up toward her sleeve, disappearing beneath the fabric. Long sleeves, indoor, in this warmth. She had not thought anything of it until now. Her friend tried to pull away, but Grandolin was quicker. Grabbing her hand, she drew back the sleeve without asking. The deep fracture continued in a jagged line up past her forearm and up toward her shoulder. It was deeper than her fracture, and a shard was missing from her elbow facet. Grandolin went still. She couldn't breathe, then looked up toward her friend wide-eyed, in shock. "It's nothing, Gran," her friend said quietly. Without a word, Grandolin tightened her grip and widened her eyes in a look that needed no translation. Her friend let out a long, surrendered breath. "I met her on Arilari, 6 months after moving there. The attraction was immediate, of course. Grandolin knew exactly what she meant. When she had met her own partner, it had been the same. The soft pull, an undeniable recognition. No words needed between them. My resonant love, her friend continued softly. She died in a crash just 2 years after we met. 2 years, Grandolin thought. The cruelty of it. Only 2 years with someone you should have had a lifetime with. She had been given nearly 20, had a child, had built something year by year, moment by moment, and it still had not been enough. To meet your life's only match, and then have them taken after just 2 years, knowing that for the rest of your life there would be no one else, that the silence where their frequency had been would be with you forever. Can you believe it, Gran? A traffic accident, in this millennium, of all things. She smiled a smile Grandolin knew all too well, the emptiness behind it, the despair in the tightened lips. It was the same smile she wore every day. Her friend took a deep breath. Gran, really, I'm fine. You, though. Grandolin felt her core drop. Don't you dare, she said, her chest tightening, her throat closing around the words. She managed barely a whisper. Uncomfortable with suddenly having to face what she had been avoiding, and with being seen, her friend looked around the room for anything to focus on, besides Grandolin. In the end, all she could do was look at the floor. Oh, Gran. Blue tears welled in her eyes. You know, it's fine. Grandolin gave her hand a tight squeeze, then softened it. No, it's not fine, she wanted to say, but the words froze in her throat. Her friend took a deep breath. You know, I don't know. I just had to stay away. All of this. She looked around again. I just couldn't do this life again. She looked at Grandolin directly. I'm sorry I wasn't here sooner. I was afraid that being near you would bring it back. She paused. We used to be so close, and I'm not brave like you, Gran. I'm sorry I wasn't there for you. Brave. The word echoed in her head. If anybody had known, Grandolin would have been the first they told. But nobody had known because her friend had made sure of it. She had hidden it from all of them, carried it alone, and then crossed the galaxy to be there for her. And where had Grandolin been when she was the one going through it? The thought hit her like a fracture through the core. Her friend's arm, the loneliness, the years of self-imposed isolation, the pain she had carried in silence while Grandolin had not once thought to reach out. Her chest and throat tightened until she could not tell where one ended and the other began. Blue dropped from her eyes. Grandolin let go of her hand. She made her way around the table and wrapped her forearms around her friend from behind, holding her tightly. She had always thought of herself as the strong one, the one who could weather anything. After all, she had faced the fiercest political opponents at every level and come out on top. But it was her who had broken down tonight. Her who had emptied her heart without once asking. Her friend had always been the stoic one, the patient listener, the one who showed up quietly and held space without being asked. And yet here she was, with no one there. No one who knew, crossing the distance to sit with Grandolin, all the while carrying her pain. She held her tighter. It never gets easier, her friend said, barely above a whisper. But it does become a part of who you are, and that is as important as when he was in your life. The room was quiet for a long moment. Then slowly, the dull gray that had lived in Grandolin for months began to lighten. A pale green glowed faintly beneath her facets, slight but warm, a warmth she had not been sure she would ever feel again. She looked at her friend and saw a soft green light emanating from beneath her gown. Her friend had been right. The pain never left, but it changed, the way she had said it would. It became a part of who Grandolin was now. She carried it, fractures and all. It was heavy, and it would always be heavy. And somewhere along the way, she had stopped fighting that, facing it, accepting it, feeling every fiber of it. Sometimes that is life and the only way through. They stayed in touch after that and met every year. Perhaps it was fate, two old friends who had each loved and lost a harmonic partner. The odds of that were almost impossible, and they both knew it. So once a year, Grandolin made the journey across the stars. She told herself it was to make sure neither of them was alone. But in truth, Grandolin knew her friend was the braver one, bearing the pain in a way that she never could, and she needed that connection in the hope that one day she might be as brave. The Zindahli incident had triggered anger, not grief. Their actions had caused her to lose control, but anger she could contain. This was merely a shock to the system. What the Zindahli had done would undoubtedly trigger a catastrophe, but how wide that catastrophe spread, that she could control. Her 8 smooth, oval, amethyst eyes caught the chamber light and refracted it into purple hues. She took it all in, the red walls, the red of her own reflection staring back at her. The anger needed no denying. It was real, but nothing would ever move forward if she dwelled in it. She breathed, and the red drained slowly out of her, settling into amber, the neutral tone, or perhaps the anxious one. The difference between the two was too fine to tell. Visk assumed it was the anxious one, and he was right, but it was the best she could do. She took one final breath and looked up toward Visk. "Do you know what they do when one of them goes missing?" He did what he thought best. He stayed silent and listened. They show up. They all show up. They bring everything they have, and they keep mobilizing until the thing that has taken their kin is no longer a thing at all. It is history. It is their law. It is in their stories, in their songs, in the very shape of their paradoxical teeth. She paced 6 paces forward, 6 paces back, her upper arms crossed and her lower arms resting on her hips, the crystals beneath her feet chiming a faint distress. And the Zindahli took one of their workers from a moon that is in my sovereign territory, Zat. There it was again, but this time her colors remained unchanged. As a graduate of the prestigious Zin Prime Academy and one of its top exo-political science majors, Visk could have taken any station across the empire, even the highly sought-after diplomatic offices of Lalani Lia, the Paradise Planet. Instead, he had stayed on Zindahli Prime and requested to work directly under Grandolin L'Fyltar. She was a hard-nosed and extremely influential imperial advisor who in her youth had been one of the youngest ambassadors ever to join the imperial court. Some had said it was nepotism, that her father's influence had carried her quickly up the political ladder. But Visk had attended a lecture of hers while he was at the academy, and he had known at once that she was the real thing. It was not her father's influence that had made her who she was. Politics simply ran through her family's veins. He had decided then that he had to work for her. He applied 3 months before graduating. That was 8 years ago, when Grandolin was Home Minister for Foreign Delegations, and he had been at her side since. She was now the Foreign Minister to the Zindahli Empire, and one of the few voices the Emperor leaned on. Since he had joined, Visk had been there for every one of her successes and had never once regretted turning down a foreign post. Unlike Grandolin, whose family had served within the empire's political arena for generations, he came from humble origins. His parents were tailors who owned a modest shop in Gatharli, a small planet only a few light years from Zigin Prime. Early on, his parents had recognized that his mind would be wasted in the family business. His father had once told him it would be a tragedy for a mind like his to be measuring cloth for a living, so when he came of age, they sent him to the academy. There he fell in love with political science and xenocultural studies. He excelled. His final paper had argued, somewhat controversially, that the empire's traditional approach to cultural integration was too slow, too rigid, and overdue for reform. When he applied to work under Grandolin, it was not the interview that got him in. It was his paper. She had found it herself, quietly the way she researched every candidate worth considering. There were holes in the argument, but the thinking was sharp and his instincts were right. More importantly, instinct was near impossible to train, and because imperial blood didn't flow through his veins, he had no allegiances and no bias to manage. As with any job, it was overwhelming at times, but he believed in the work. There was a particular satisfaction in watching a treaty come together or helping a civilization discover its potential. Hundreds of species existed throughout the galaxy, each with their own history, their own cultural architecture, their own unspoken rules of engagement. Some sat on the Galactic Council. Others existed outside it entirely. and beyond them were more pre-contact civilizations, some close enough to spaceflight that they required careful monitoring. His first 2 years were spent learning about the dozen civilizations that held voting seats on the Galactic Council. Who were their champions, their rivals? What made each of them tick? The Academy had merely given him a starting point. Grandolin's office was where the real education began. One advantage he had, and one Grandolin had quickly noticed, was that Visk had a knack for drawing people out. Even strangers, after a few minutes with Visk, found themselves talking about things they normally kept to themselves. He had learned early on that if you wanted the conversation to flow, the best strategy was to offer a half-formed idea. It acted as a psychological catalyst, triggering in the other person a compulsion to correct or to fill in what was missing. Of course, there was a fine balance to it. Too dim-witted, and you were simply dismissed as a fool. This was not a calculated strategy or manipulation. It was quite simple. Visk wanted to help. He had always found it difficult to watch someone struggle with a thought when a small nudge could free it. A half-formed idea was often that nudge, because no matter the position, whether subordinate or superior, it was in the nature of most intelligent beings to want to teach, to educate, to help others grow, or for the more disingenuous, to manipulate and scheme. Either way, the response revealed the person behind the words. In this case, he was watching someone he deeply respected wrestle with a weight he had never seen before, and he wanted to help. So he spoke. Surely the humans will understand that the Zindahli government had no part in... They will understand nothing until I make them understand. And I have, perhaps, a day. She stopped pacing and stared at her aide with all 8 eyes. Maybe just hours. She crossed to the emerald armchair where she liked to think and lowered herself into it. The crystalline floor under the seat went quiet, the way they did when she had something difficult to say. Sit, Visk. Sit down. She motioned to him with both her upper and lower arms, a polite Zindahli invitation. I need to tell you a story I have not told you, one you must be privy to. He sat slowly on the chair opposite of her, his forearms still folded. Yes, Minister. She pressed a stud on her belt. A privacy barrier bloomed around them. Transparent, but not invisible, a faint shimmer slowly rose in the air and closed over them like a held breath. The resonance of the selenite walls fell away to nothing. Inside it, the crystals could not sing, and nothing they said would leave the space between them. Before we begin, there is some official business to get through. She paused, regarded him for a long moment, and for the first time in 2 years, used the full form of his name. Visk Regilini. His 8 eyes focused on her. You are hereby promoted to Senior Attaché. Do you accept and swear to uphold your full civic duties? Do you accept the responsibilities given to you by imperial decree of the Zindahli Empire? And do you promise to uphold the Emperor's will? It came out of her without emotion, as if she were reciting a mere fact. It took Visk by surprise. Rather than joy or excitement, given the state he had just seen his minister in, he only felt worry. She had posed it as a question, but in reality, he knew he had no choice. Even if he did, his answer would be the same. His response was more the result of training and dutifulness, almost a slip. Hesitant, but without thinking, he responded, I do. Don't be so surprised. We planned on promoting you during the next review cycle. It's just been expedited. Regardless of these circumstances, you have earned it. She was not lying. He had matured in his role, handling complex political crises with calm, sound judgment. He performed beyond the expectations of a junior attaché, and despite his youth, she had come to rely on him a great deal. He reminded her of her younger self, with one small difference. He was calmer and less excitable, good traits to have within the Empire's political arena. What I am about to share with you is restricted to attachés of senior rank and above, hence the expedited promotion. The protocol exists for a reason, and I have no intention of breaking that rule. However, we will skip the bureaucratic miasma of getting your promotion approved, so your promotion is in effect as of now. She gave him a sharp look. I'll need your help, And we need to move fast as our ministers move like clumsy Hafta beasts and cannot be trusted to act swiftly. She then reached down, then pressed the black recording stud on her belt. Visk noticed and straightened his posture. Grandolin began, "For the record, this is Grandolin L'Fyltar, Foreign Minister to the Empire, administering an oath of secrecy to Senior Attaché Visk Rigulini. Do you understand that the information I'm about to share with you is highly classified? You are prohibited from sharing it with anyone. You are also prohibited from recording or annotating this information in any form. If you leak, record, or discuss this material to non-authorized persons, you will be charged with treason against the Zindahli Empire." He nodded. "I need you to say it, officially." "Yes," he quietly responded. Then he recited the words he had first been taught at the academy, the same words he recited on the day he was sworn in as a diplomat, and repeated many times since for matters of less weight than what he was about to hear. "I, Visk Rigulini, understand completely. The details you are about to share are classified. I will not disclose, record, or discuss them with anyone or any entity, artificial or not. I will not knowingly or consciously commit treason." Grandolin nodded in satisfaction and turned off the recording switch, looking down to ensure that it was turned off. "This conversation does not leave this bubble, and when I am finished, you will carry it with you, quietly, the way I carried it." "First," she said, "a question. Tell me, Visk, why do you think the United Earth Concord is a key voting member of the Galactic Council?" Visk blinked, surprised by the question, but knew that she wasn't really asking. "It is a fair question," she continued, answering herself. "The United Earth Concord is 200 years old. The next youngest member of the Galactic Council is close to 10,000. Our own empire has been a spacefaring civilization for over 100,000 years. 100,000, Visk. And yet humans who burst into the scene 2 centuries ago, utilizing chemical rockets and patchwork technology, sit in the upper chamber of the Galactic Council and vote on motions that govern civilizations 50 times their age. Why?" He thought for a long moment. On a couple of occasions, Visk had the opportunity to meet with visiting emissaries. They were cordial, professional, unremarkable. Not the strongest of species, not the weakest. Almost everything he knew about them had come from trade briefings and diplomatic summaries. He answered with what he knew. "From what I have seen and read, humans are considered superb negotiators and traders. The economic models, the case studies, both impressive." He paused. "But honestly, Minister, my exposure to them has been limited." "Yes, they are that. They are superb traders. But trade alone does not buy a seat in the Galactic Council, Visk. If it did, the Ulambar would have one. The Ulambar are better traders than the humans by every measure. They are better negotiators, better financiers, and they run the commercial guilds that connect half this cluster. Even they have been denied membership for 6 centuries. Then why the humans?" "That," Grandolin said quietly, "is the story I am going to tell you." She closed all 8 eyes for a long moment and then opened them. "Have you ever heard of the Krig?" the minister asked in a hushed whisper. "No, I haven't," Visk answered. "There is a good reason for that," she replied. "When our grandparents were young and our parents not yet seed crystals, less than a decade after the United Earth Concord made first contact, before anything was really known about humanity, there was an incident. Another relatively new power called the Krig Imperium, which sat near the new human frontier, decided that the newcomers were soft. The humans were small. Militarily, their fleet size was insignificant by the standards of the day. The Krig sent a raid party to a human merchant outpost on the cluster's edge and took 43 of their citizens, clerks, traders, and 4 children, all younger than 6 Earth years. They demanded concessions. They were certain the humans would pay. Every galactic race would have paid, you understand, because the Galactic Council had rules. There was a formal complaint process, and the alternative, coming for one's citizens with force, was the kind of thing nobody did. But then, just to show how serious they were, the Krig publicly executed the youngest child. He was just a 4-year-old boy. They did it in front of the boy's parents and broadcast the event across their planet. then sent the humans as well as the Galactic Council a recording of it. The citizens of Krieg cheered when they brought the boy out, and they cheered once again when they murdered the poor child. Grandolin was no longer looking at Visk. Caught between a terrible memory and the telling of it, her colors froze a still gray, with her eyes distant, seeing a past that was no longer there, a past she could do nothing about. I reviewed all the archives. They took that poor boy Visk, like barbarians. He was only a child, a baby, and the Krieg broadcasted, then their citizens celebrated like it was a festival. As a mother, I can't imagine. Blue salt crystals began to form and flake from her eyes. She swallowed hard, holding back her crystalline tears, and continued. That was nearly 200 years ago, but an atrocity will always be an atrocity. To the Krieg, a slaver race that ruled by fear, a child's life meant nothing. They valued experience over youth, and the weak existed only to serve the strong. It was painful to watch. The Galactic Council saw it, and we did nothing, because we had a process. Our stance, as it had always been with first contact species, was to guide rather than intervene. Over time, we would help the Krieg evolve, help them understand that violence was not the way for a spacefaring species, help them understand that the galaxy was a shared space. It was not a perfect science. Some species never changed, but the process was the process, and as always, the Galactic Council stood by it and trusted it. The Krieg forces were significant, and although we had the capability, we had no appetite for war. As first contacts, our expectation was that the Krieg would adhere to the rules or risk losing their place within the Galactic Council. So we did not treat this any differently from any other first contact. We followed our process. The Galactic Council condemned their actions. The Emperor condemned the act. We sent the Krieg our cease and desist order. We outlined the reparations they would need to pay humanity, including a formal public apology through the proper diplomatic channels. Of course, the Krieg scoffed. They ignored the letters, going so far as to threaten the Council, even threatening to enslave all of humanity. This was not unexpected. We had encountered species like the Krieg before. Our process would eventually calm them. It might take a century, perhaps more, but they would come around. It was logical, it was precedent, it was process, and it was arrogant. While we focused on the Krieg, we never once looked in the direction of humanity's soul system. Why would we? They were not the aggressors. They were a small, newly spacefaring civilization with hardly any military presence. Insignificant. Why would they risk everything against a far more powerful foe? The Galactic Council convened. We were confident the matter would be resolved. Visk said nothing, his crystalline features mimicking the gray of his superior. While we were looking toward the Krieg, the humans came, with everything. It was a fraction of what they have today. The Krieg fleets were over 10 times their size on paper. We warned humanity, told them it was suicide. Their response, recorded in the archives, was calm, and one of the most chilling responses I have ever heard. They came for us, murdered our child. Now we come for them. They said, "Our child, Visk. Our child." The power behind those words. Their entire species claimed that child as their own. It was their little boy who had been brutally murdered in the most heinous, public way imaginable. Grandolin's voice shook. She had been speaking about events that occurred 200 years ago. In that time, technology had evolved. Discoveries in medical sciences had extended life across dozens of species. The galactic economy had grown. Civilizations that had once been pre-contact now sat peacefully as part of the Council. The galaxy had changed in almost every way a galaxy could change, but humanity, Grandolin thought, had not. What they were capable of 200 years ago, they were capable of today, except their weapons were more powerful, their fleets larger, faster, and deadlier. She knew this all too well. We had no idea, Visk. No idea how wrong we were. There is an old human film, a piece of post-war entertainment. Visk twisted his head slightly, his 8 eyes narrowing. Grandolin understood his reaction. Confusing, yes? Imagine the hypocrisy of that statement. Post-war entertainment. Yes, Visk, It is exactly as it sounds. Humanity is a species that takes war and creates entertainment from it, not for educational purposes, not for military institutions to study, purely for entertainment, and made just years after the events occurred. It is not just legendary battles or the wars of their long-forgotten ancestors. It is wars of the current generation, wars fought by those sitting in the audience, watching for pleasure. They are a species that glorifies battle, bloodshed, and war. In that film, an enemy admiral who had launched a surprise attack on a rival nation says, "I fear all we have done is to awaken a sleeping giant and fill him with a terrible resolve." The Galactic Council had no idea, and the Krieg certainly had no idea what they had done. But they had awakened the beast that is humanity. Humanity did not cower when they saw the recording of the child's execution. They did not hide. Their minds operate differently, Visk. They mourn, and the mourning turns to anger, and the anger turns to rage, and that rage becomes vengeance. Their collective hearts beat faster. It is not exactly bravery, and they are not fearless. But to save others from what they perceive to be evil, they will sacrifice everything, including their own lives. The human fleets were small. There was no standard to their shipbuilding. Many looked as though a child had assembled them out of mismatched parts, gluing weapons and armor wherever there was room, until there was no choice but to call them warships. The technology was completely random. Some were powered by fossil fuels, others by atomics, others by solar sails. Solar sails, Visk. In our eyes, it was all primitive. The Krieg laughed, calling the human fleet a mockery of warfare. But humans have a saying, never judge a book by its cover. Their technology had branched out in ways we had not thought of or explored. Each ship had been designed with a devastating purpose. The fossil-fueled ships ran on pulse detonation engines, producing violent bursts of thrust that made them perfect for close-quarters combat, rapid attacks, sudden retreats, and the kind of brutal guerrilla warfare the Krieg had never trained to counter. Their projectile weapons were designed for every scenario: solid core kinetic rounds that passed through Krieg energy shielding, dense core slugs for hull penetration, fragmentation batteries that detonated on impact and scattered metal across a wide field, shrapnel spreaders that used the enemy ship's own hull as ammunition, turning every hit into a second weapon. What we thought were cargo containers with weapons welded on were drone carriers that unfolded mid-battle, releasing tens of thousands of unmanned attack craft into the Krieg formation simultaneously. The bulky hulls were not bulk at all, but layered armor engineered to absorb and deflect Krieg energy weapons. The solar sails were actually energy absorption nets that drew in Krieg weapons fire, concentrated it, and returned it as a focused beam that sliced through Krieg hulls. And their tactics tied it all together. Every ship, every weapon, every system working seamlessly, as though the entire fleet had been built for this single engagement and nothing else. It was something we had never imagined possible from what they had to work with. The Krieg never stood a chance. And they worked fast. The Krieg's military-industrial complex was dismantled piece by piece. They burned the shipyards. They burned the supply depots. They evacuated the slaves and destroyed the slave markets. They hit every military installation across the Krieg system until the Krieg had nothing left to fight with. They spared the civilian populations, and Krieg casualties were almost all military. The war was shockingly swift and decisive. In less than 2 months from deployment, humanity had neutralized the Krieg. Then they went to the Krieg capital and demanded the return of the remaining 42 hostages. Unfortunately, only 36 were returned. The Krieg had executed the others. The humans had no idea. We had no idea. The Krieg had already broadcast the remaining executions before the human fleets had arrived. Out of arrogance and for the entertainment of their populace, they had killed the remaining 3 children and their mothers. The human fleets did not move. They remained floating above the skies of the Krieg capital in silence. They had cut off all communications. For 3 Earth days, they said nothing. With their military neutralized, the Krieg sent notices of surrender. The Galactic Council repeatedly hailed the humans. They did not answer. At the time, we had no idea what the humans were doing. We had assumed they were drafting articles of surrender and the terms of Krieg concessions. On the third day, our intelligence operators were finally able to intercept partial communications between the fleets and Earth. They were researching the Krieg historical archives, their art, their music, their poetry. They were having heated discussions with their top philosophers, politicians, military analysts, and religious leaders. We were confused. Why would they research Krieg art? Krieg history? Perhaps they wanted to catalog the antiquities before some final negotiation. Perhaps they were preparing reparations, valuing the cultural assets they intended to demand. Then we heard them speak of the citizens of Krieg laughing at the death of the 4-year-old boy. Of the hostages who were not catatonic, they debriefed everyone, hearing not only the accounts of the human captives, but of Krieg enslaved by their own kind. They were told of the Krieg's plans to enslave humanity. They saw that no one in the Krieg political arena had condemned the executions. They saw the captured recordings of the other executions. The citizens had cheered, and not through coercion. Humanity's research showed what the Empire already knew, that the Krieg had been cruel for generations. Although they had not always been this way, it had been centuries since they were anything else, and they had done it to their own kind as well. And on the fourth day, we understood what the humans had been doing, why they remained silent for 3 days, why they were speaking to philosophers and religious leaders. We had been catastrophically wrong. She paused, her eyes focusing on Visk. Deep down in his crystal core, Visk knew that what he was about to hear would change him forever. Grandolin saw his struggle. For her kind, which had always strived for peace and balance, the information she was about to share would not only change his galactic view, but his view of the empire he served. It had done the same to her, and she had not been the same afterwards. It was necessary, not only for Visk's sake, but for the empire's. When her light died out one day, she would need him to take her place. Our empire has pursued peace and understanding for as long as we have existed. Violence has always been our last option. Even when our ancestors fought extinction-level threats like the Null Void, whose nature was clear and whose evil was absolute, war was not our first option. For 100,000 years, we have navigated the oceans of this galaxy, negotiating, mediating, and maintaining the fragile peace that holds it together. We are eternally patient teachers. The Arvalans, once a bloodthirsty warmongering race who knew nothing else, found another way. It took centuries, but in the end, they allowed us to guide them, and they changed. Now they sit on the council as one of our closest and most trusted allies. But some things, Visk, we cannot change. Not every species can be guided. Not every cruelty can be reasoned with. In our daily lives, many of us find it easier to look away than to extend a hand to those who are suffering, and we all have our reasons. But our reasons, regardless of what they are, mean nothing to those who are suffering. The Empire is no different. We ignore the immediate plight of others, convinced that our process is the only way, that our process will prevail. And when you see the galaxy only through the Empire's eyes, you see only its accomplishments. The founding of the Galactic Council, the peace we have brought to the galaxy. It is a one-sided view, Visk, and it is a dangerous one. Our complacency and our unwavering trust in our own process allowed the Arvalans to continue murdering millions across their sector before they found peace through us. It allowed the Ulambar to monopolize the food supply across 4 sectors, collapsing several systems and killing millions by starvation. Starvation, Visk. We have automated food processors and we allowed millions to starve. In every success, the Empire claims there is a failure tied to it, even with the Null Void. Rather than bolster our defenses against a threat we knew was likely to strike first, we allowed them to run rampant and destroy 4 core planets before taking action. One of those civilizations went extinct. Gone, because we decided to trust the process. And even with humanity, we assumed we had time because we have always had time. Our framework was not built for a clock that ran on human time or the time of anyone else who needed us urgently. Our lack of urgency will become the Empire's demise. The Emperor sees this, And so we must change the way we approach galactic politics before another, less empathetic species changes it for us. In this role, Visk, some of the choices we make will go against the brittle facade that holds our ideals together. And you, without ego, without bias, without the comfort of hiding behind what you think you know, must be willing to make those choices anyway. Visk swallowed hard. He had no answer. He was not sure he would ever have one. He had spent 7 years by her side, believing he understood the weight of the work, and in the space of a single conversation, all 8 of his eyes had been opened to how little he had truly seen. Grandolin continued, "Unlike us, humanity did not wait. On the 4th Earth Standard Day, before we could do anything, the Galactic Council received a secured message, a single sentence from the United Earth Concord. 3 words, 'We are sorry.' That was all. There was no clarification, no preamble. And then they moved. First it was the Krigg capital. Without warning, the human fleet launched multiple atomic warheads and turned the capital, and everything in it, to ash. For the 7 the Krigg executed, and above all for those children, the humans took, by their own terrible accounting, the entire planet. They sterilized it. Over 13 billion Krigg gone. In less than a week, their imperium had been reduced to a regional irrelevance. The only ones spared were the Krigg slaves who had been previously evacuated to rural regions across the planet. The Krigg who exist today are mostly descendants of those slaves, living as a localized protectorate of the Hindle Concordat. The once spacefaring civilization no longer exists. They live as a pre-industrial society of farmers and villagers, a far cry from their ancestors. Visk had stopped folding his limbs. He was very still, now a purple hue of shock and terror. "Atomics?" Visk simply whispered. "Yes, Visk, and other mass collapse weapons." The Galactic Council was horrified, Visk. Every member. They formally censured the United Earth Concord. No race had ever committed genocide at that level toward a non-extinction level threat. The lives of 7, although innocent, cannot equal the lives of billions. Senior diplomats from a dozen empires wrote position papers describing the response as grossly disproportionate, barbaric, evidence of a species not yet ready for civilized contact. There were calls to expel the humans, trade sanctions, entire academic conferences devoted to whether the humans should be quarantined from the broader cluster until they had outgrown what was called, at the time, their adolescent overcorrection. Nobody dared go to war with them. Their military prowess inspired awe and dread across the galaxy. In the 100,000-year history of the Empire, we had never seen troop transports rip through dreadnought hulls mid-battle, unload dozens of soldiers directly onto enemy decks, and turn capital ships into battlegrounds from the inside out. The way they used projectile weapons to overwhelm Krigg energy shielding, the way their ships maneuvered in anticipation of their enemies' attacks, their understanding of multidimensional space warfare, the calculations, the logistics, the planning, they had done things we had never imagined possible in a fleet battle. While our empire and the Council survived in peace for millennia through negotiation and de-escalation, humanity had been simultaneously preparing for both war and peace. They are an enigma. Then what happened? How did they end up in the Council? Visk couldn't stop himself. This was a part of galactic history he had never learned, a piece of history he had to bear and understand. What happened, Visk, is that they accepted the sanctions. They offered no excuses. They wrote no defense. What followed in human society was a moral reckoning of a kind no other civilization has ever conducted. Their philosophers and academics wrote papers and articles condemning the actions of their own species. The admiral who had led the response removed himself from command within the year and wrote a book titled, simply, The Sin. It became required reading at every UEC officer academy and remains so to this day. He died 8 years later, his body broken by a grief that no medical science could heal. There were those who supported what had been done. They argued that a civilization which had cheered the murder of children had unmade itself, and that the human fleets had only finished what the Krigg had begun. But the supporters were few and far between. Genocide was genocide. They saw through their own excuses. They had entered the galactic stage, seen that it was teeming with life, and in less than 10 years had extinguished 13 billion souls. Yes, the Krig were evil. Yes, they killed the children and their mothers. But if humanity had applied the same logic historically to themselves, there would be no humans left. They became a haunted species. They kept writing and reflecting, not for the Galactic Council, not for other civilizations, but for themselves, for their own redemption. They traded with whoever would trade with them, quietly expanding, quietly establishing colonies on non-contested worlds. Most species avoided human space. They retreated when they saw human ships. But for the next 80 years, no one took a human. No one. Not by accident, not on purpose, not as a covert operation by any of the dozen galactic states engaged in routine hostage commerce. No one took a human. The humans expanded, and every galactic race in the cluster, no matter how loudly they had publicly condemned the Krig response, privately updated their rules on humans. The cost of taking and harming a human was not the ransom. The cost was the entire weight of your civilization. That was until the Threllic hegemony, 80 years later. The Threllic were a galactic race about the size the Ztari coalition is today, a regional power, reasonably respected, and a violent Threllic terror cell known for political assassinations and abductions from which their victims rarely returned, took a young female human diplomat who was on a courtesy visit. She paused, looked him in his eyes, and slowly spoke the next words. Visk, this is the part that lives in the deepest sealed archives of the Empire, that only a very few of us have ever read. The human wasn't the only one taken. The Threllic had also taken 4 of our own. Visk's breathing stopped. They took Princess Lulmatani and 3 members of her retinue. You mean that Princess Lulmatani? Yes, that Princess Lulmatani. Visk's face slowly cycled through colors he had not, in 7 years of service, allowed his minister to see: violet gray. The Crown Princess Lulmatani L'Fyltar, next in line at the time, on her first foreign soil courtesy tour, accompanied by 3 members of her royal retinue. She and her retinue had been on the Threllic capital world as guests of the Hegemony Senior Council. The human delegation and ours had overlapped at a reception. Despite the protests of her retinue, the princess engaged the human diplomat. The princess and the young human woman, who both, as it happened, loved xenoarchaeology and antiquities, had struck up the kind of quick friendship that state visits occasionally produce. When the princess arranged a private visit to one of Threllic's national museums, she invited the human woman along. The terror cell intercepted that motorcade, took all 5 of them, the princess, her 3 retinue, and the human woman, while killing the driver where he sat. Wait, Visk interrupted. Invited? If they hit the motorcade, then their intention was to kidnap the princess, not the human diplomat? Yes, wrong place, wrong time, but our records hid that fact. Hid it? Oh, don't be so naive, Visk, she sighed. How long have you worked here? No, it's not that. It's just, I'm shocked. Like I said, naive. But why hide that fact? Now there's the diplomat I've trained, asking the right question. She knew it was selfish to pull Visk into this quagmire, but the circumstances demanded it. Knowing what he was about to hear would allow him to understand the deeper human crisis that they were about to be dragged into. Then she remembered the old human proverb, desperate times call for desperate measures, and a passage from her daughter's favorite poet. Solutions are offspring of problems, yet problems have no parent. They are not born, they are not made. They have always been, since before time, beyond time, hiding in the shadows of ignorance, visible only once we are wise. If she wanted to prevent a catastrophe, or at the minimum prevent her government from being dragged in further, she needed not only the Emperor's support, but help from those closest to her. Once his mind is open to this new problem, then perhaps together they will find the solution. She answered him, but like a good politician, indirectly while setting the stage. To answer your question, you need to understand the entire story. The terror cell had not coordinated with the hegemony's senior leadership beforehand. The hegemony, on receiving the news, should have disavowed the whole act, should have apologized, should have moved every resource it had to recover the princess and the human diplomat. Instead, the hegemony claimed the abduction. Our intelligence teams at the time of the abduction believed that the hegemony's senior leadership saw an opportunity to leverage simultaneously our princess and the human diplomat into broader concessions. Simply put, they got greedy, and the key is they put this in writing. Twice addressed both to the United Earth Concord and to our own embassy, declaring that the 4 Zindahli and the 1 human were now joint instruments of the political process, and that any party seeking the return of its citizens would be expected to come to the table on Threllic terms. What did our empire do? Grandolin smiled a forced smile of sad acceptance, the same smile from someone whose fate had been sealed and who could do nothing else. We convened the Galactic Council. We summoned every relevant minister. We commissioned briefings. We mapped contingencies. The Galactic Council convened on the 2nd day after the abduction and was scheduled to deliver its preliminary findings on the 8th. 8 days for an initial response. Grandolin let out a slow, deliberate breath. Even knowing that the terror cell assassinated its victims within 2 weeks, the council remained inflexible in its process. She was quiet for a moment. On the morning of the 6th day, while the High Council was still hearing testimony from the Imperial Treasury about the long-term economic implications of various retaliation tiers, and while our princess sat beside the human woman in a prison hold deep underground, eating field rations, both of them afraid, both of them fully aware of what this terror cell did to its captives, neither of them knowing if anyone was coming for them, the humans arrived. How? Silently. Fewer than 30 operators, drawn from an elite human unit whose name even now does not appear in any record. They had been orbiting the Threllic homeworld for 3 days in their stealth transport, waiting for the Galactic Council to either act or fail to act. When the 6th morning began, without a council declaration, they began their operation. Armor the Threllic sensors could not see. Comms the Threllic intercepts could not parse. Insertion craft the Threllic orbital network registered, when it registered them at all, as weather patterns. They walked into the bunker, kilometers deep, the most secure subsurface facility the terror cell maintained. For the past 3 days, they had maintained a geosynchronous orbit, mapping the terrorist base of operations while running extraction drills. They cleared every floor with a speed and precision no military in the galaxy had ever seen. They moved through the bunker, room by room, level by level, neutralizing the operators by hand and silenced projectile weapons. They cleared 16 levels in less time than it takes to brew Hale tea. They reached the hostage block. They found every hostage, the human woman, our princess, the 3 members of her retinue. Extracted all of them, all alive. There was no obligation, Visk, none. The humans were under no obligation to rescue our princess. The Galactic Council had sanctioned them. The Empire had condemned them. They had been called barbaric, adolescent, unfit for civilized contact. And yet when their team reached that prison hold, they did not leave her behind. They did not hesitate. They did not stop to weigh the politics or calculate what her rescue was worth to them. They extracted every living soul in that block as if they had always intended to, as if it had never occurred to them to do otherwise. They risked their lives for us. Were there any casualties, Visk asked. None on the human side, but over 500 terror operators were gone, but not all of them. The ones they let live deliberately. They captured the senior leadership of the terror cell, and that, you should understand, was just the opening move. Hours later, while the Hegemony Senior Council was still reeling from the news of the rescue, while their secretaries were in the literal process of drafting a formal protest to the United Earth Concord declaring the bunker operation an act of war, a second team of human operators, cloaked in technology, the Galactic Council, 120 years on, still does not know how to detect or replicate, walked into the central governmental palace of the Threllic hegemony on the Threllic homeworld, neutralized over 100 palace guards without killing any of them, and extracted the senior ministers and counselors of the hegemony from their own chambers. The ones who had signed the document claiming the abduction, the ones who had put our princess's name in writing as an instrument of negotiation, taken from their own desks, on their own homeworld. Mid-sentence, in some cases, mid-draft of the protest letter they would never finish. Do you understand what I'm telling you, Visk? They infiltrated a foreign government's seat of power on its own soil in broad daylight, neutralized its guards, and removed the responsible parties. All that with zero casualties. There is no record in galactic history, before or since, of an operation of that profile being attempted, let alone succeeding. And the technology that made it possible, the cloaking, the comms, the insertion methods, the Council has spent over a century trying to figure out how the humans did it. We still cannot. The humans, in the meantime, have not stopped developing it. Whatever they used that day is by now antiquated. They have improved their technology many iterations over. We do not know what they have now. We only know that they have it. The implications of this? She trailed off. The humans took both groups within hours of each other, the cell leadership from the bunker, the hegemony ministers from the palace, and they delivered them in restraints to our cloaked Zindahli Imperial capital ship. A ship we had concealed several light years away, just outside of Threlic territory. They hailed us, Visk. They actually hailed our cloaked ship like they were playing hide-and-seek with a toddler. The responsible parties were tried within a closed court. The verdicts were given. The sentences were carried out. New hegemony leadership, rumored to be pre-selected by the humans, took the empty seats. No war was declared against the humans. And the humans, having delivered the defendants, asked for nothing in exchange. No commercial concession. No public acknowledgement. They did this with the same controlled precision a surgeon uses to remove a tumor. The cell, which half the galaxy had been trying, ineffectively, to dismantle for several centuries, was finished in one morning. The hegemony leadership that had enabled it was finished by the end of the trial, 3 months later. Visk's color had gone to a deep indigo, the Zindahli response to overwhelming awe. Now consider, Visk, the position our empire found itself in. She let the silence run for a moment before she answered her own setup. For 80 years, our diplomats had signed position papers calling these same humans barbaric. Our royal family had voted to censure the United Earth Concord over Krieg. Our ambassadors had used the phrase adolescent overcorrection in the great halls of the Galactic Council on the official record more than 50 times. And on the 6th day after our princess was taken, while the council was still hearing testimony, while our imperial treasury was still modeling the long-term commercial impact of various retaliation tiers, those same barbarians whom we had so publicly condemned eliminated one of the most dangerous galactic terror groups and walked our princess out of a hole in the ground that our procedures had not yet decided whether to send a strongly worded note about. She paused. It was the single most institutionally humiliating week in the history of the Empire. The Galactic Council never delivered its findings. The findings document was withdrawn the moment word of the rescue reached the capital and, 3 weeks later, classified at the same level as the rescue itself because there was nothing in it that the Empire could afford to have read by anyone. Our princess had been freed by people we had called uncivilized. The Empire could either acknowledge what that meant about us, or it could acknowledge what that meant about them. It chose, with considerable wisdom, to acknowledge what it meant about humans. And then, she continued, the second part, the slower part. While our tribunal was sentencing the ministers, a parallel campaign was unfolding in the commercial courts of the cluster. It was the financial unmaking of the great houses of the hegemony, the ones that had funded the cell, sheltered it, and laughed when the princess was taken. That part took 18 months, in courtrooms, in commercial commissions, in the published exposure of every shell account the humans had patiently mapped. Because the humans, Visk, do not do anything in half measures. The records were already complete on the morning of the rescue, filed the moment the princess was returned safely to our ship. The great houses defended themselves for 18 months in the Galactic Court. What sealed their fate was what the humans uncovered. Evidence that the houses of the hegemony had conspired not only to kidnap the princess, but to assassinate her in an effort to destabilize the empire from within. In our blind faith in our own process, in our belief that the hegemony, like us, had the best interests of the galaxy at heart, we had almost lost everything, including our empire. I don't believe in luck, Visk, but if not for Princess Lumatani engaging the human despite her retinue's protests, and if not for the human having agreed to ride in the same motorcade rather than meet the princess at the museum, there would have been no rescue and the line of L'Attaché would have been extinguished as well as the future of our empire. The empire knew this, and the Galactic Council knew this. Humanity had single-handedly saved our empire and without us asking. This is what I mean, Visk. Humans don't just solve the problem, they eliminate it. And the hegemony itself? It exists, Visk, because the humans wanted it to exist. They wanted a husk, an example, a thing other states like ours could look at and understand. They did not destroy it because destruction is cheap. Perhaps they learned their lessons from what they did to the Krieg, but then the hegemony didn't kill their captives. Nevertheless, the humans unmade the hegemony, left it alive, but unable to act, a third-rate trading state, a museum piece so that the lesson would last. She opened her eyes. They are a paradox, Visk. At times they strike with a speed that looks almost like passion was the driver. At other times they wait and plan in layers, the way a Yulin game master plays a campaign that will not resolve for a generation. But what they do has long-lasting effects, and when they are done, the state that took their citizens no longer exists as a state, only as a warning. She was quiet for a moment. When our princess was returned to us, the humans made no public announcement. They kept the entire operation confidential as a token of respect to the empire. They didn't have to, but they did it anyway. And our empire, to its credit, did three things in quick succession. The empress at the time thanked the human ambassador personally and in writing for saving her only daughter. She redirected the imperial treasury to support the United Earth Concord for full membership in the Galactic Council. And she sealed the operational details of not only the Threllic rescue, but also much of the Krieg genocide at the highest classification within the empire, where they have remained ever since, and where they would have remained beyond your lifetime, except that I am telling you now because I need you to understand what is about to happen. She paused. The Zindahli have just done the Threllic thing, and not yet the Krieg thing. They have done it within our borders. And to a human under our protection and sponsorship. Now, the humans are coming. She turned to the wide, slow-rotating crystal lens that served as her workspace, and with a brush of 2 fingers, summoned a holographic map of the galaxy. Her empire's bright cyan territory wrapped around a sliver of dim red, the Starry Coalition. On the other side of the galaxy, within the Orion Arm, was a small blue-green smudge that encompassed multiple systems. 2 centuries ago, that smudge had been a single point of light, only 2 centuries. Send a priority pulse to the Emperor. Encrypted, royal channel only. Tell him that a human was taken. She inhaled. The crystals in the walls expanded with her. That is all. He will understand the full meaning. Yes, Minister. Pray to whatever you pray to, because I've studied these humans for 20 years, read their history, their literature, their war manuals. I've watched their films and listened to their music. She closed her eyes, all of them, for one long second. And I do not know if anything in this galaxy can stop what is about to happen. So you and I have work to do, so we can do whatever we can to protect the galaxy. The newly appointed senior attaché nodded his head in silent acknowledgement. And one more thing, Grandolin added. Get me everything you have on the human, Jonathan Lee Baker.